Hello and welcome back to the Captain Squadron. I am Joe Dove. It is very nice to be here with everybody tonight, and we are excited to have a writer with us and a little bit of reverb. We have the amazing Keith, R.A. DeCandido. Keith, how are you? And thank you for joining us in the Captain Squadron, section 31 and a half, because we have questions.
I'm glad to be here. I should point out that my last name is pronounced DeCandido.
Oh, Candido, excuse me.
Damn it, Joe! Damn it! It's been like 60 seconds and you're already screwing it up.
It's fine. Everybody gets it wrong. This is my life, is correcting people's mispronunciation of my last name. I am very well used to it.
It's okay. He's been calling me by the wrong name for 2 years now, so it's fine.
Yeah, I try. I feel like it's my modus operandi to mess up people's names. So
Not just names, but that's okay.
oh. So Keith, I had the distinct honor of joining you on stage at a convention, and in doing so, I said, "Hey, how would you like to be a guest on our show?" And you were gracious enough to join us, and we really appreciate it. But I gotta ask right away, what started your journey into sci-fi writing?
I don't remember that far back because it was kind of always there. My parents are also science fiction fans. They were never involved in like capital F fandom. They didn't like go to conventions or anything like that. But they were and are dedicated readers of science fiction and also watchers of science fiction television. They watched Star Trek when it first aired in the 60s. And I grew up watching Star Trek here in New York City in the 70s. It was aired on Channel 11 every weeknight at 6 o'clock. And so that was our routine. We would watch Star Trek at 6 and then we'd eat dinner at 7. That was that was what we did once we all got home from school and work. And we used to, once I was old enough to read on my own, they gave me stuff like The Hobbit and the Earthsea trilogy by Ursula Le Guin, Robert Heinlein's YA books, stuff like that. So the interest in science fiction and fantasy was always there. And I always wanted to write. I always wanted to be somebody who would make stories. The first thing I wrote was when I was 6 years old. It was called Reflections in My Mirror. I did it on construction paper at summer camp. It's terrible. I was 6, but that was that. I've been writing like since then. They didn't start paying me for it until much later, but it's something I've always loved. I've always been a devotee of science fiction, both on screen and in print.
Nice, Jason.
So, I don't know if you know, but I am also a fellow science fiction author, self-published, and I am proud to say that my book was purchased by almost a dozen people. My question to you is, what does it take, in your opinion, to break into the professional writing biz? Asking for a friend, of course, because I'm already there.
Hell if I know. So there is no one way to do it. You ask any 10 writers how they broke in, you get 12 different answers. My own way of doing it was actually completely back-asswards because I started out working as an editor. I worked for a book packager named Byron Price throughout from 1993 until 99. And, well, till 98, and then I was freelance for him for a while after that. So I kind of backed into it that way because the editorial stuff I was doing gave me the opportunity to pitch to anthologies first, and then making the connections to pitch other tie-in things. Basically, the only way to do it, I mean, the one of the ways to do it is to just submit things to large publishers, and if they turn you down, submit it to another publisher, and then work your way down. The advantage is, and the biggest advantage now, as opposed to when I broke in 30 years ago, is that you have a lot of options. You don't just have like the major New York publishers, and if they don't publish it, you're out of luck. You can go with a medium-sized press. You can go with a small press. You can self-publish. There are tons of options. Then you can still get your stuff out there. It's a lot like what's happened with television. Like, television used to be, if you were on one of the big three networks, that was it. That was your choice. Now there's tons of choices, and they all have different levels of audience penetration, which is also true of publishing. A book published by Simon and Schuster or by Macmillan or by Penguin Random House is probably going to reach more people, or at least theoretically reach more people, than one published by a small press running out of somebody's, house in New Jersey. But and I say that as somebody who is doing quite well publishing with a small press that has run out of a house in New Jersey. But or you could self-publish and, as you say, sell to dozens of people.
A dozen.
There are
a dozen.
Yeah, I was being nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. But there's, I mean, the best bet is to, start out shooting high, shoot for the moon first. If that doesn't work your way down. And do your research. See what imprints are publishing stuff in the genre you are writing in, because every publisher has different sub imprints that specialize in different things. And it's easy enough to find out who the editor is. The stuff you can look up online fairly easily. If they only take agent and submissions, then you want to try to find an agent, which is a whole other process, which is completely different from the way it was when I started. So I can't help you at all in that regard. But, I've had the same agent for 20 years. So,
oh wow.
And I had an advantage in that because I worked as an editor for so long and was working as an editor at the time. I knew most of the editors working in science fiction at the time. That is no longer the case because there's a lot more of them, and some of them retired or moved on or died or something. But of the ones I worked with, my agent is Lucienne Diver of the Night Agency. She was one of the ones I really liked. And more to the point, she was somebody who I saw as really advocating for her clients. Like, there were some agents that were very easy for me to work with as an editor, but that wasn't something I wanted. I wanted somebody who was going to fight for me, but who would also, not be a pain in the ass. And she does that. So yeah, I mean, there are so many different ways to break in, and they're all incredibly heartbreaking and difficult and soul destroying. But it's worth it if you wind up with a book with your name on it in the end. So
there you go. So did you have a lot of heartbreak when you do it?
Like I said, my method of breaking in was completely wrong and atypical. I started out doing tie-in stuff, which doesn't usually happen. I pitched short stories to people I was working with, and then my first novel actually came about because my boss was too cheap to give me a raise, so he gave me a novel contract instead. So it just I got into it in a weird way. Having said that, sure, there's plenty of heartbreak. Happens all the freaking time. I've had projects yanked out from under me. I've had things not work out. There were 2 tie-in projects that I did quite a bit of work on that wound up not happening. I have written 2 movie novelizations that were never published.
Wow.
In one case, because the movie never happened.
Star Trek 4.
But
no comment.
No. It was nothing. It was way more ridiculous than that. The other one, I can't say what I can't say what it is, but it was. And I got paid for it, but not very well. I took a low advance because the movie in question I figured was going to be successful, and I was right about that. And they gave me a very good royalty rate on it, so I took a lower advance, figuring I'd make money on the back end. Except, of course, they never published it. Then the publisher went out of business anyway, so I wouldn't have gotten the royalty.
Jeez. So How does it?
Oh, that was it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. How does it work to actually be able to write within so many different franchises? Because you're not only writing with Star Trek, you're writing with Farscape and a litany of different science fiction masterpieces. So, like, how does it work? Do you have to bug Paramount, or like, how does that whole process come together?
The tie-in fiction starts with the publisher, not with the writer. So a publisher will buy the rights from whoever owns it. Like for example, Titan Books bought the rights from Warner Brothers to do books based on Supernatural. And they did like 17 books or so. At the time it was 20th Century Fox, now it's Disney. But Titan also does Alien and Predator books that they bought the rights from 20th Century Fox at the time to do that. Simon & Schuster has had the rights to do Star Trek novels since 1981.
Wow.
Well, technically since 79 because they did the motion picture novelization. But then the first book came out in 81. And they've had that license. They just renew that license every year. But it always, like I said, it starts with the publisher, and then the editors at the publishing company turn around and hire somebody to write the book. Usually they will go with people who are established in some way, which is why me breaking in as a tie-in writer is unusual. Normally they want to go with somebody who has experience, simply because there's a lot of extra crap you have to deal with when you're editing a tie-in book. Everything has to be approved. There has to be, the plot outline has to be approved, then the manuscript has to be approved, the cover art has to be approved, sometimes the interior design has to be approved. And so you've got all that extra stuff that the editor has to deal with, so they don't really have the time or the inclination to also walk a newbie through the process on top of that. And tie-in fiction is much more deadline intensive because it's much more aggressively scheduled. So you have to be, they want somebody who has a track record of turning things in on time, which is a very important part of the process. So they tend to hire people who have some kind of track record.
Gotcha.
Even if it's not necessarily in tie-in fiction.
So I have a question for you. I've noticed
I hope I have an answer for you.
Well, we'll find out. I noticed while I was fondling your bibliography here, you write a lot of video game adaptations, and that piqued my interest. So I want to know how is writing a video game adaptation such as Alien Isolation, because that was the one that caught me right there, because I love that game. How does something like that differ from writing in a universe based on visual media like television or movies?
It depends. Well, there's a certain amount of visuals associated with Alien Isolation too. There were all the various cutscenes in the game. So I had some visuals to work with, but it's a different challenge because of course the needs of the game are different from the needs of fiction. The Venn diagrams overlap somewhat, but not 100%. And there's a certain flexibility you've got when you're adapting a game, because what happens in the game is changeable depending on who's playing and what they're doing. Whereas in a work of fiction, everything's set. It's an interesting challenge. Some of them are more aggressively plotted out than others. Like, for example, I wrote a World of Warcraft novel in 2006 called Cycle of Hatred. There is no gaming universe more micromanaged than World of Warcraft, and this is especially true in the early part of the early 2000s when it was at the height of its popularity. The approval of my outline was delayed by a week because they were too busy installing 6 new servers to handle all the gamers. That I worked very closely with Blizzard on, and they were very fussy about every single step of the process. Other games are a little looser. Alien Isolation had a pretty straightforward storyline that I was adapting. I had a certain amount of flexibility because like I said, every player does different things, and there's certain parts of it that were in there that were great for gameplay but made for very uninteresting fiction. So I would skip over them or just have them happen quickly or something. Plus, on top of that, part of my remit with that book was to not just novelize the game, but also to provide backstory for the main character of the game, who was Amanda Ripley, Ellen Ripley's daughter. and getting to develop her was actually that was a lot of fun. That was the most enjoyable part of the book for me was fleshing out her character and also getting to see more of Ellen Ripley before the first movie.
Wow. So when you write deeply into these different franchises, do you like zone in and focus and like avoid all contact with other franchises so that you can kind of come up with these wonderful stories?
Not quite that much. I don't completely isolate myself, but I do tend to immerse myself in the particular universe. If it's something that is relatively small scale, I'll like sit and watch all of it. For example, I did a Leverage novel back in 2013. And I sat and I watched all of Leverage that was available up to that point. Obviously, if I'm writing a Star Trek story, that is not practical.
No.
But I will, if it's a Star Trek story, I will pick out particular episodes and or movies that relate to what I'm writing. The stuff that like if I'm doing a Klingon book, I'll grab a bunch of Klingon episodes and just go through them just to get get it all in my head but plus when you're watching it, when you're researching it as opposed to watching it for fun, you're looking for different things and paying attention to different things. I noticed that especially when I was going through Leverage, because I was just watching it as a fan up until I got the novel contract. And for that matter, when I got the gig to write the Farscape comic book, I hadn't actually sat down and watched Farscape in a while when I got the gig. So the first thing I did was just mainline the whole freaking thing. Which was great, which was tremendous fun, and it's so much easier to do now. When I first got into the business in the late 90s, research was they sent you VHS tapes, which have like maybe 1 or 2 episodes on it, so you get this huge big pile of VHS tape. Now I just call it up on my computer. It's fantastic, so much easier.
The digital age is amazing.
It really is. I love living in the 21st century. Anyway,
it is a lot of fun. Yes.
But yeah, I try to immerse myself in the universe. How they talk, what the feel of and the vibe of the actual storyline is, because every universe has its own feel. The feel of Farscape is completely different from the feel of Star Trek, which is completely different from the feel of Andromeda, which is completely different from the feel of Alien. Alien in particular, it's a very dark, depressing, and also very much a working class setting. One of the things I love about the Alien franchise, or at least before the most recent movies, is that it's not about the shining lights of the future. It's about the truckers. It's about the longshoremen. It's about the Marines. It's about the everyday people who get caught up in this nonsense. And there's a certain beat up quality to the technology that I really like. The alien universe feels particularly well lived in, and I tried to convey that when I was writing the book. So yeah, there's a certain amount of immersion that you have to do. I don't completely cut myself off from everything else. That's silly. Some people have to do that. I shouldn't say it's silly. I don't need to do that. And that's another thing. If you ask any 10 writers what their process is, you also get 12 different answers. Because everybody's got their own way of doing things. And the important thing is to find out what works for you, and also enables you to actually, get stuff done. I know some writers whose process is such that they never actually finish anything, which means that their careers don't go anywhere, and that's bad. But
except for George R.R. Martin.
He finished lots of things. He's George had a very long career before the first Game of Thrones book came out.
Oh, okay.
That was not his. He didn't come out of nowhere to do a Game of Thrones. That was like his, I don't know, 20th novel or something. Plus, he had a career in Hollywood. This is not.
Damn it, Joe! You're embarrassing me.
Oh, don't say that. He's known to not have finished.
Oh yeah, no. He his inability to finish the most recent book in the series is getting kind of hilarious at this point. But again, everybody has their own process, and there's been stuff happening with that franchise, and
he can do whatever he wants. Okay, I mean, he's George R.R. Martin. Yeah. He takes another 10 years. You know what, George? You do it. You do it till it's ready.
Yeah.
All right, Jace, your question.
Okay, so let's talk about the process a little bit. Let's say that someone comes up to you and says, "We want you to write a book based on, I don't know, Stranger Things. Something you haven't written about before, beginning to end. Describe what your process would be in this totally fictionalized writer's contract that you just got."
Well, the first thing I'd have to do is actually watch Stranger Things, which I haven't yet. It's on the very long list of TV shows that I really want to watch at some point and just haven't yet because there's way too many TV shows on the air now. Having said that, like I said, the first thing I would do is, and this would be true even if I had been watching the show regularly, I would sit down and watch it all again. And it would depend on whether they just said, "We want you to pitch us a book," or "We have a story idea for you." Most of the time, they're looking for the writers to come up with pitches. That's what they hire us for. There are some licenses, though, where they give you at least a thumbnail or a log line or something as a starting point. For example, I did a Sleepy Hollow novel based on the TV show from the mid 2010s. And they gave me like 3 or 4 different 1-sentence springboards that they wanted me to use as a possible storyline. I still had to come up with an actual plot based on that.
I'm sorry. Whenever you say a 1-sentence springboard, what do you mean by that?
One sentence that just basically is a quick pitch of what the story is.
Oh, okay.
Or at least the starting point of the story. Like, for example, my first Star Trek novel was Worf's first mission as Federation ambassador. So that would be, that's the log line. Worf's first mission as Federation ambassador after the DS9 finale. The Articles of the Federation was a year in the life of the Federation president. That's that sort of thing. So then I would sit down and I would binge Stranger Things, and assuming and then I would start thinking about, okay, what kind of story can I do? And then I try to come up with several different pitches of novels, because a lot of times when you pitch something, it gets rejected for reasons that have nothing to do with the quality of it, but because it doesn't work for them for one reason or another. Particularly if it's something that's ongoing, a lot of times you'll pitch something, it's like, nope, sorry, we're doing something like that in season 2. Which literally happened with the Sleepy Hollow book. I came up in this particular instance, I not only mainlined the show because Sleepy Hollow was so aggressively tied into the American Revolution. I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York, went to the American wing, and was checking out some of the Revolutionary War era art just to see if anything prompted a story notion, and something did. They had an elegant sword that was awarded to heroes of the revolution on the colonial side, and they were issued in 1775, but not actually distributed until 1785 because it was a silversmith in Paris who had to actually make them. So I pitched the idea that those swords were also magical objects, because that's what Sleepy Hollow did. It added magic to the Revolutionary War. Pitched it to them. Fox came back, said, "Great, we love the idea. It can't be a sword." Because it turns out they were doing a magic sword story in season 2. I had no way of knowing that because season 2 hadn't happened yet. So I made it something else. But so the plot still worked. I just had to change the details because I didn't want to step on something they were already doing. And that's that sort of thing, especially when something is ongoing, is always a risk that you'll do something that contradicts something they're planning in the future. So you usually, and also sometimes they just won't like stuff, so you try to come up with 2 or 3 ideas. When I was invited to pitch Supernatural, I pitched 2 different ideas. They liked one of them. I wrote that, and then it did really well, and they said, "Hey, can you write another one?" I said, "Well, I just sent you another pitch." I said, "Right, yes, do that one." So
is there a particular Star Trek franchise that you enjoy writing most? Are there particular characters that you love and then you want to go back and write more on their universe?
I was fortunate enough to work on two series that originated in prose. New Frontier kind of broke the dam on that when that came out in 1997. Right. That up until New Frontier debuted in '97, Star Trek novels had to tie into one of the TV shows. That was required. They tried New Frontier as an experiment that summer. It sold like crazy. And so they kept doing it. And they started doing other stuff that wasn't based on a specific TV show, but was like they did a series of novels of Captain Riker on the USS Titan. Michael J. Freeman did a bunch of books, took place on the Stargazer when Picard first took command of her, 20 years prior to Next Gen. And there was the Vanguard series, which told stories in the original series era on a starbase. And I did about 5 books based, 4 or 5 books, taking place on a Klingon ship called the I.K.S. Gorkon. And I had so much fun with that. I enjoyed the hell out of that. I loved writing those characters. Every time I wrote one of those books, it was effortless. Those characters were so very much in my head that, I mean, particularly when I wrote, I remember writing the 3rd book, and it's like everything was just flowing beautifully. It was wonderful. And then also in 2000, John Ordover, who was one of the editors at Simon & Schuster at the time, and I created the Starfleet Corps of Engineers series, which was an ebook original series before ebook original series were a thing. We were a bit ahead of our time on this. This started in 2000. They canceled it in 2007, 6 months before the Kindle was launched. The timing could not have been worse. It's like they could have just given us another year. But we did a monthly series of novellas starring the Corps of Engineers, and that I was the editor in charge of that. They hired me on a freelance basis to edit that, and I also wrote several of the novellas in the series as well. And that was so much fun. That was like show running a TV show in so many ways. And I really, we just a bunch of different writers who have continued to work in Star Trek worked on that, including David Mack, Dayton Warden, Kevin Dillmore, Ilsa J. Bick, and some other people who William Leisner, and a bunch of people who hadn't done Trek before, or much Trek before, and came in to do that, like Aaron Rosenberg, Glenn Howman, Lauren J. Coleman, and Randall Bills. And I'm forgetting some people, but it was great. It was really fun, bouncing ideas off each other and doing things and stuff. And I really enjoyed that. So that was those two, just because I was so heavily involved in them, and not just writing them, but also in developing them and creating the series.
Now, did you end up running around New York City screaming in Klingon?
No.
Oh, I would.
I don't know very much Klingon. I have people for that. I am friends with Dr. Lawrence Schoen, who is the head of the Klingon Language Institute. I'm friends with Mark Okren, who developed the language. And I just basically I consult them when I need Klingon terms. I love this story. When I was writing A Time for War, A Time for Peace, which was the last part of the Time 2 series that ran through 2004, that was chronicling the year leading up to Star Trek Nemesis for the Next Gen crew. And I needed a name for a bloodletting ritual. And so I emailed Lawrence and I said, hey, I need a name for a bloodletting ritual. This is what it's for, this, that, and the other thing. Let me know. The book's due in 2 weeks, so I kind of 2 weeks pass. I'm done with the book. I've read it over. It's all ready to go, except I don't have a name for the bloodletting ritual. I emailed Lawrence. I said, Lawrence, I need this. And if you don't give me something, I'm going to make something up. And I know how much you hate that. Turns out I started a major argument amongst the members of the Klingon Language Institute, who are all academics. These are all, professional linguists and linguistics professors and such. So they, and I mean, nothing like mean or, bladed weapons were not involved, but there was a lot of arguing.
And that is not a true Klingon argument.
Well, at least as far as I know, there was no. I mean, they may have been just prettying it up for me. I don't know, but so they gave me 5 different terms, of which Lawrence said 2 of them were particularly good, and of those 2, I picked the one that sounded cooler. but it was like that's the sort of thing that happens. But people take this very seriously, which is great. I love that there's an entire institute dedicated just to the Klingon language. But no, I know my limitations. I am not a linguist, and there are people who have done a great deal of work in developing the Klingon language, and I'm more than happy to consult them on it. I struggle enough with English, much less learning something else.
Yeah. Jace.
So you were talking about deadlines there a second ago, and that just actually rolled into my next question. How long from beginning to end does it usually take you to finish let's say a TV tie-in novel? Is any generic one? What is the timeline on something like that?
However long they give me. I've been given as much as 6 months. I've been given as little as 2 weeks.
Oh my God.
Well, 2.5 weeks. That 2.5 weeks was for a movie novelization.
I can't even write an email in 2.5 weeks.
The fastest I've written a straight up original novel is 3 weeks, which I've done a couple times. I prefer to have longer than that. Those in each case, those were 3 very intense and very unpleasant weeks. But a couple of the movie novelizations I've done had to be done that quickly. I novelized Serenity back in 2005, and I did that in 2.5 weeks. And that was especially galling because I did it I had to turn it in by the Monday of Thanksgiving week in 2004 because the movie was originally supposed to come out in April of 2005. So I turned it in. My editor sent a copy off to production to start that process, sent it off to Universal for the approvals process. I took a nap. Woke up Tuesday morning, and Joss Whedon gets on the internet and says, "Hey kids, guess what? They moved the book from April to September."
Oh,
you know the shot of the city skyline with somebody screaming? That was me. And the worst part was we couldn't verify it because it was Thanksgiving week. Everybody gone home. We couldn't actually verify it with Universal until the following Monday. So I'm spending a week banging my head against the wall, thinking about all the sleep I missed. But I mean, it was already in the production queue anyway. There was nothing to be done about it. So, I mean, I'm still happy with how the novelization turned out. I just could have had an easier time of it.
Oof, wow.
But I try to write to the deadline. One of the reasons why I got the Sleepy Hollow novel was because it had like a 6 to 8 week deadline, I think it was. And I was, of all the people that the editor at Random House queried about it, I was the only one who didn't balk at the deadline.
Mm.
And it's like 8 weeks, luxury.
So just a quick question. It's all about questions, but one of the things that I noticed, you brought up the fandom, and a lot of people are very passionate about it. And you and I met at a convention, and I'm sure that's not your first convention. So I'm wondering, does anybody take your book of work and get upset by something you've written and then confront you at a convention? Have you ever had like an obsessed fan just pop up and argue you to death?
No. I've had people argue with me about things, but no, it's always been friendly and in the spirit of fandom, of enjoying it and caring about the material. I mean, every once in a while you'll get somebody, but not that much. I've had people who have disagreed with my stuff or didn't like my stuff, but it's almost always been civil. Certainly in-person interactions have always been civil. I've been attacked online a few times, but who hasn't?
Yeah.
I mean, most of the critiques people have had with my interpretation of the universe has been friendly. Not always. Although my favorite was there was a couple reviews of my first couple Supernatural books. And it was really hilarious because you'd see one on Amazon. There'd be one review that says he writes Sam really well, but he obviously doesn't understand Dean at all. The very next review, he got Dean right, but he obviously doesn't understand Sam at all. I got that so much, and my favorite was one where I had Dean picking a lock, and somebody wrote a cranky review saying, "Well, obviously you didn't watch the show because Sam's the one who picks the locks." And then like 2 weeks later, an episode aired with Dean picking a lock on the show, and I was like, vindication. But and I also made a major screw. I got Dean's eye color wrong in my first book. And so I totally mea culpa'd it in my second book, where I had somebody, a woman he was flirting with, refer to his eyes by the wrong color that I use, and Dean thinking, God, what kind of an idiot wouldn't tell what color my eyes are? Jeez. So
That's amazing.
yeah, when I own it when I screw up.
Yeah, you got to. I mean, I screwed up your name in the beginning, so I own that.
Exactly.
All right.
You and everybody else.
Yay! I'm with everybody.
Yeah.
So, is there a franchise that you have not written for but would like to?
Oh, sure, tons. I pitched. There's a couple that I pitched that just didn't happen. Back in the midst of prehistory, I pitched a Quantum Leap book. For the original Scott Bakula, Dean Stockwell version of Quantum Leap.
Oh boy.
I pitched a Highlander novel. They came this close. There was one book left in the Highlander contract, and they had 3 pitches. Mine was one of them. They went with one of the other 2. Yeah. And what else? I would have loved to have written a Battlestar Galactica novel from the 2003 reboot. And there's some others. I would have killed to write a Homicide: Life on the Street book, but when they did novels of that, they went with an Edgar Award-winning mystery author for some strange reason. So I was fine with that. Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff floating around out there that I would love to do. I'd love to write Star Wars. I've actually been more excited about Star Wars the last 10 years.
Said that
the last 10 years or so than I was before. It's funny. When Star Wars first came out in '77, when I was 8 years old. I was huge. Like, I was completely obsessed with Star Wars. That fandom burned really bright and then burned right out. I still enjoyed it, but I was never as big a fan as I was for those first couple of years after the first movie came out. But there's a lot of stuff they've been doing with it that I'm really excited about, and I would love to write for Star Wars, but it hasn't happened yet.
Listen out, Star Wars, folks.
Yes.
Go and reach out to Keith. Let's go.
Follow-up question.
Yes.
How about the newer Star Trek series? Are there any of those that you would like to write for?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I've actually written a Discovery story. It just came out in Star Trek Explorer. The most recent issue, issue 9, has a President Rillick story called Work Worth Doing.
Oh, nice. I love that character.
Which was her backstory. I literally wrote the book on the Federation presidency. My 2005 novel, Articles of the Federation, was about a year in the life of the Federation president. And I developed a whole bunch of stuff about the Federation government. So when the character of the Federation president became a regular supporting character on Discovery in season 4, I was over the moon. And I loved the character of President Rillick, and I really was thrilled to get an opportunity to actually write about her. But yeah, I honestly, there are aspects of every single one of the new shows that I would love to take a shot at as a fiction writer. The Discovery is especially ripe for storytelling possibilities since they jumped into the future. I love Strange New Worlds just on principle. And both Prodigy and Lower Decks are tremendous fun in completely different ways. And there's stuff they created for Picard, especially for season 1, that would definitely be worth exploring at some point. And for that matter, I'm dying. I would love to get a chance to write about Worf's journey from where we saw him in Nemesis to where we saw him in Picard season 3. There's definitely a story or 12 there. But yeah, no, I'm enjoying the hell out of everything pretty much that Secret Hideout has been doing since 2017. It hasn't all been perfect, but neither was any of the other stuff. So, and I spent the last 12 years rewatching every single one of the older shows and writing about them for Tor.com. I I did Next Generation initially from 2011 to 2013. Then I did Deep Space Nine. Then I went back into the original series, and then since January of 2020, I did First Voyager and now Enterprise. I'm almost done with Enterprise, and it's been great, just going through all that and writing about it and talking about it, and the comments have been great. Tor.com is the exception to the don't read the comments rule. The comment section is genuinely fun and full of interesting conversation. And that's, but it's also shown up, every single one of the first 5 shows also had major problems as well. And it's especially hilarious to me hearing, like, when Discovery started airing in 2017 in particular, not just that people were complaining about it, but they were making the exact same complaints about it that they were making in 2001 when Enterprise came on the air, except now they were accepting Enterprise as part of when Star Trek was good. It's like, this isn't like what it was between 87 and 2005. It's like, wait a minute. I thought Enterprise was like this horrible thing that you couldn't bear to be part of Star Trek. And now you're saying it is. And it'll happen again with, 20 years from now when they create a new Star Trek show. This isn't as good as Discovery was. Yeah.
They can be so insufferable sometimes.
Yes. But I mean, and honestly, this has happened every single time there's been a new Star Trek. There has been a vocal group of people who think that this isn't real Star Trek and they're ruining what came before, starting with the motion picture. A lot of the arguments people were making about Discovery they were also making about the motion picture. The technology's all wrong.
The Klingons look different. What?
Right, exactly. And I pointed that out when I reviewed the first episode of Discovery. It's like, yes, this is we are dealing with Star Trek in a format that you now have to pay for, in which the technology all looks completely different, in which the Klingons especially look different. And I am, of course, talking about the motion picture. And yeah, and people complained about Next Gen when it came on the air that, oh no, you can't possibly do Star Trek without Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And then Deep Space Nine came on. You can't possibly do a Star Trek show that's not on a starship.
See, I'm from Texas, so all I heard was black guy. No, no, that's all I heard.
Yeah, well,
wow. Yeah, you think I'm kidding? I'm really not.
No, I know you're not.
No, I know you're not.
And well, that's another complaint that I find especially hilarious. Like, when did Star Trek get woke? And my answer is 1966.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh! Anybody who says that is just not watching the show.
Yeah, and you still hear it all the time.
Yeah.
Oh man! So you also happen to have a plethora of comic books that you've done. So what's the difference in the process of book writing to comic book writing?
Hefe, what is a plethora?
What is a plethora? It's like a lot of books.
It's a whole lot. It's not really a whole lot. I've written about 55 or so. The biggest comic book project I did was the Farscape comic. I did 5. No, how many? 6 4-issue miniseries. 3 of them were continuing the story after the Peacekeeper Wars, and then they were successful enough that we did an ongoing series that lasted for 24 issues. And then I also wrote 3 Dargo-focused miniseries: Dargo's Lament, Dargo's Trial, and Dargo's Quest. And I've also done a couple of Star Trek comics. I did a 4-issue miniseries back in 2000. I did a couple one-shots, the Alien Spotlight Klingons, and the Captain's Log Jellicoe comics. I wrote a Cars 4-issue miniseries based on the Pixar film. And I've done some others.
I think you might own that too.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
I'm very vocal. I'm a very vocal anti-Cars person, but that's okay.
Gotcha. It was actually a real challenge to write that because the cars are just faces, really.
Yeah.
It's really hard to write a comic book for a character who is basically just a car. There's no body language. There's no nothing. It's just a face.
Lightning McQueen got a funny feeling in his exhaust. Is my spark plug going off? Wow.
It was fascinating. Anyway, it's a completely different storytelling format, and you're not doing it all yourself either. You're depending on the artist to do at least half the work. and it's more and because and it's usually, for the most part, it's a very prescribed format, especially if you're doing a monthly comic book where you're only doing like 22 pages, or the comic book that's of mine that's coming out right now is a Resident Evil comic book, speaking of video games, called Infinite Darkness: The Beginning, which is the prequel to the Netflix animated series that came out in 2021. And in that case, it's only 20 pages, and so you have to tell your story in 20 pages. You don't have any wiggle room the way you do with prose. And I also tend to treat each page as a discrete storytelling unit. So I try to make sure that like the page as a whole is telling part of the story all by itself, or sometimes a double page spread if you're doing it that way. But you have to think visually, and you have to really pare the story down. In the same way you have to do with a short story, but even more so. In a novel you can have digressions and weird subplots and extra stuff. In a comic book, you really have to boil everything down to the essentials. But it's fun. I enjoy working. I don't get to work in the medium nearly often enough, quite frankly. I enjoy it when I do. I've done, like I said, I did Farscape. I did a few Star Trek. I did Cars. I did a graphic novel adaptation of a science fiction novel called I.K.S. by Gregory A. Wilson. And I'm doing the Resident Evil one now. I'm actually right now adapting a novel that I co-wrote, a serial killer novel called Animal that I wrote with Dr. Manish K. Batra. Came out in 2021, and we're doing a graphic novel adaptation that J.K. Woodward is doing the art for.
Wow.
J.K. also has done a lot of Star Trek stuff for IDW. He did the Doctor Who Star Trek crossover. He actually did the both IDW Star Trek comics I did, the Klingon Alien Spotlight and the Jellicoe one shot were both by him as well.
Wow.
And he's done a bunch of others. I think he did the Pike one and some other stuff. He's a great guy. And he'll be at Trek Long Island, by the way.
Oh, nice. More
yeah.
people for us to hang out with. Yay.
Yeah.
So, kind of peering at your bookshelf behind you, what authors inspire you?
A lot of different ones. All the ones I mentioned earlier that I read from when I was a youth, Le Guin and Tolkien and Heinlein, Harlan Ellison. Who else? I'm like blanking on all the people I've read growing up. A lot of a lot of comic book writers too were a big influence. I read a lot of I was the Marvel comics of the early 1980s were a big influence on me. The Chris Claremont X-Men, the John Byrne Fantastic Four, J.M. DeMatteis's work on Captain America and Marvel Team Up and the Defenders, and Roger Stern, Ann Nocenti, Louis Simonson, Tom DeFalco, Bill Mantlo, Roger Stern, all those guys. That was a pretty big influence. Le Guin, definitely. She was both as a fiction writer and as a nonfiction writer. I have, over the course of my career, met and sometimes worked with a lot of very big names in science fiction, fantasy, and comic books. The only time I turned into a quivering mass of fangooberishness idiocy was when I met Ursula Le Guin. It was at a ReaderCon in I don't know, late 90s, I think. And I was just a complete dunderhead when I met her. Nobody else. I've worked with Harlan Ellison. I've worked with John Romita. I've worked with Stan Lee. All sorts of Robert Silverberg. All sorts of people. I got Harlan Ellison and Robert Silverberg. I edited a story that Harlan Ellison and Robert Silverberg collaborated on at a time when they were not speaking to each other. Which I still number as one of my greater editorial accomplishments. But Roger Zelazny, Robert Sheckley, people I loved growing up, like Michael Jan Friedman, Peter David, Robert Greenberger, Vonda McIntyre, Diane Duane, all wound up becoming friends and colleagues when I became a professional in the field. and I'm fine. Yeah, and Le Guin's the only one I turned into a gibbering idiot in front of.
We have a quick comment from VHS Jace. What an incredible career he has had. Very,
well,
very
I don't past tense that. I'm still going.
Damn it, Jace, you're embarrassing us.
That's our
No,
other founder.
and you know, it's possible that it won't get any better from here. So, no, working with Stan Lee was one of the great pleasures of my life. He was a joy to work with. That persona was not an act. He was really like that.
Oh, wow.
And my favorite memory of Stan was at San Diego Comic-Con, and I want to say 1997. And we took him and his wife out to dinner, and it was a whole staff of us who were working for Byron Price who were at the convention. How is Stan spending this dinner with one of his clients? Is he talking business? No, he is sitting next to Byron's then 8-year-old daughter, playing with the action figures that she had bought on the show floor that day.
Oh my god!
This is how he spent his business dinner. Yeah,
that's amazing.
It's so cool.
Amazing. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I got it. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, the other great thing about working with him is that the closest he came to missing a deadline was when he turned something in early. He wrote a bunch of introductions for me for the various Marvel anthologies we did. And, you know, we would talk about you know, what he was going to do and how he was going to write it and this, that, and the other thing. And then if he didn't, the only time he didn't turn it in on time was when it was early. He never missed a deadline. He was an absolute joy to work with.
Wow.
But
you were going to ask something,
Jason. Around 2016 or 2015, I got to meet Stan Lee. And he was so sweet, even with his entourage. Like, oh, Mr. Lee, you have to go. Don't talk to Mr. Lee. You know, people would come by and say, "Thank you for making Spider-Man." He go, "Don't mention it. It's one of my favorite things." He was just such a sweet guy.
At one of the years at San Diego, he was signing at our booth, and he wouldn't leave. You know, he wanted to make sure everybody got their autograph.
Wow, what a guy! Speaking of cons, as you know. Folks know, you and I met at the Farscape panel. We co-moderated that. It was my first time, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do that with the WinterCon folks. But I've got to ask, because you're a fan too, is it a weird transition to go to a convention and be like, "Oh, I'm here to see"? Oh, no. People are here to see me. Is that like a weird thing for you to adjust to?
It was at first. I mean, I went to conventions. I started going to conventions in high school, mostly just like little rinky-dink creation shows here in New York, and then I started going to I.K.S out on Long Island when I was in college in the late '80s, so yeah, I would go to, you know, Comic-Cons a lot and just go there to, you know, meet actors, meet authors, meet comic book writers and such, and then and it was great. And then to transition from that into I'd like, you know, now I'm the person people are coming to see was very weird at first. I'm used to it by now. It's been, you know, 30 years, but it's still, I mean, it's still great, and I still love the fact that I get to go to conventions and meet cool people like that, you know.
And be the cool person that people come to meet.
Also that, I guess. Yeah. I'm that's still a little weird to me, but I've pretty much come to accept it because it keeps happening. So, but I love going to conventions. I love the direct feedback that you get, and you know, being able to connect with people who've read my work and, you know, connect with them more directly, and also to introduce my work to people who may not have heard of me before, which is much more common. But you know, it's like, who are you? Well, I wrote this book.
What is book?
Yes. Well, those people usually just walk away. But but there are plenty of readers out there. It's like, oh well, you know, I love fantasy. I love serial killer books. I love supernatural. I love, you know, the supernatural books are great. I love all three of my supernatural books are still in print. They came out in 2007, 2008, and 2010, and they're still going. And that fandom is very intense, and I love having those books on my table when I have a table at a time, because it's like table catnip. It's like, oh, look, Sam and Dean. That always draws people over. So,
what about your cryptid work? Because I picked up your Jersey Devil book, and that is amazing. It's a lot of fun. I live in Jersey now, and that's one of the things that, like, I was most curious, like, what's all about the Jersey Devil? And your book actually gave me more insight than Google did. So, big thanks to you on that. For sure.
That story takes place in the same setting as an urban fantasy series I'm doing, which eSpec book is going to be re-releasing. I had to switch publishers on that. I've written the first book was called A Furnace Sealed, and it came out in 2019. The second book is called Feet of Clay, and that'll be out hopefully in 2024, if all goes well, along with the reissue of A Furnace Sealed. And they take place in the Bronx, actually, which is where I'm from.
Spent a lot of time
because nobody ever writes about the Bronx. It's always Manhattan south of 125th Street, maybe Brooklyn if they want to get edgy, but otherwise it's like the outer boroughs are like Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island are always ignored. Northern Manhattan's always ignored, and it's like, screw that. I want to. So, and there's a lot of cool stuff here. So, but the Jersey Devil book that you bought takes place in the same setting, it's just with a different main character, because my guy Bram Gold works in the Bronx. This needed to take place obviously in Central Jersey. So, but that particular book was part of a series called Systema Paradoxa, which eSpec Books, the publisher, one of the publishers I work with, is doing in conjunction with a company called Cryptid Crate, which is a subscription service that has information and tchotchkes and stuff about cryptids, including these books. It's the series. God, it's up. I think they're up to 20 books by now. And I'm under contract to do another one with the same. It's probably gonna have the same main character, but it's supposed to involve the Beast of Sherman, because they're trying to go through some of the more obscure cryptids too.
Oh, well, I'm from Westchester, so if you ever want to do a Skinwalker one, we'll talk. Jace, do you have any?
We have the Goat Man here.
The Goat Man.
The Goat Man, yeah, the Goat Man. It's he would what's the word I'm looking for? He would harass teenagers who would park at this one place near Fort Worth and jump on their cars and go, I guess, I don't know. But he would harass people at Lover's Lane. So there you go. Get a little bit of, fun things in your book.
We have a comment from Keith Ra. Detail. See, look, I feel vindicated. Somebody else said it wrong, spelled it wrong. So from Star Trek, I have his books. Burning House, Klingon Empire, Cal Hudson book, too many old ones too. So you got fans that are popping in to say hello. MC Jones.
A Burning House was the last book that featured the I.K.S. Gorkon. That was we rebranded it as Klingon Empire in the hopes that it would goose sales, because the third book didn't do very well. It didn't work. But I was very proud of A Burning House. That one, it had the crew. The ship had been badly damaged in the previous book, so it was putting in for repairs, and so the crew was scattered to the nine winds on shore leave. So I got to portray different aspects of Klingon life that we don't really get to see on screen very much. We got to see a Klingon farm. We got to see a Klingon opera company. We got to see a Klingon slum. We got to see a Klingon medical conference, which was very strange.
Was there a Klingon therapist there by any chance?
There was not.
That's a bit.
But
that's why it didn't sell well.
And there was the usual political intrigue and weird intelligence stuff, and it was just I wanted to take a broader look at what life is like in the Empire, and I was very pleased with how it turned out. Actually, and it sold decently, but not, and certainly sold better than the previous one did, but that was pretty much the last one. The Cal Hudson book that they're referring to is I did a 2-book series called The Brave and the Bold, which was basically Starship Team Up. There was a prelude with Enterprise, and then the other 4 then extant TV shows. I did Kirk's Enterprise teaming up with Matt Decker and the Constellation about a year before the Doomsday Machine. the Doomsday Machine made it clear that Decker and Kirk knew each other.
Yes.
Yes. So this was so I established their first meeting a year earlier. I had the DS9 crew teaming up with the USS Odyssey, which was the ship that the Jem'Hadar blew up in the episode of Jem'Hadar. Basically, a story that takes place right before that episode, where it was established that they had been patrolling the Cardassian border. So I did basically the lead into that, and then Voyager was sort of a double team up because it took place before Caretaker. So it told the story of exactly how and why Tuvok infiltrated the Maquis. So it had Voyager teaming up with the USS Hood, Voyager on a shakedown cruise still, and Cal Hudson's Maquis cell teaming up with Chakotay's Maquis cell.
Oh wow, what an intertwined story.
Yeah. And then the last bit was the Enterprise E, Picard and the Enterprise E teaming up with my Klingon crew, the Gorkon crew. And the object, and in each case, the point of view characters were the other crew. So it was showing how the characters were familiar with, were seen by other people in Starfleet or other Maquis or how the Klingons saw them, and that was a fun little exercise. It's the only time I've actually written the original series crew. And it was fun. It was especially fun doing the various Maquis people and the weird, politics of terrorism there.
The politics of terrorism.
And just coming up like filling out the crews of the Constellation and the Odyssey and the Hood.
Yeah.
Was a lot of fun just coming up with different characters.
So speaking of intertwined tales, a few years ago, Pocketbook started doing these gigantic crossover arcs. And I can't remember what the first one was, but it was 4 books. There was the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. And they did these 4 linked novels about this alien race that had come through. And they kind of continue that for a few years. And I'm segging very badly into Gateways, which you took part in. So I do have this up here to show that, yes, I do read. So my question, I've always been curious how something like this is put together and organized, because you have Diane Carey, you have Peter David, you have you and a bunch of other authors all participating in the formation of these books. And I think Gateways was probably the biggest one that came out of this this crossover period. So can you give us a look inside the biz and tell us how something like this was organized, and what kind of notes did Pocketbooks give you?
The one you were thinking of, the first one was called Invasion.
Invasion.
Yes. That was in 1996. And
remember the Deep Space Nine one was my favorite because it did this bit about finding the Defiant inside of a comet, and it's millions of years old. And I just thought that was the most haunting, depressing thing I'd ever heard, because they find his body like still in stasis, and it's just like, oh my gosh, it's terrible. In the best way.
They tend to be, editorially directed to some extent or other. The concept of Invasion was conceived by John Ordover, who was one of the editors at Pocket at the time, and the same thing with the others. He would a lot of them he developed in conjunction with one of the other authors. Usually would start with a basic concept, and then they would bring in people to do the different pieces, and a lot of them weren't that. Actually, Gateways was one of the more aggressively crossover-y ones. Like Invasion and Day of Honor and the Captain's Table, everybody got to do more or less their own story. They were linked, but and they were thematically linked, but they weren't like each book told its own story for the most part. Double Helix was a bit more that was a bit more one story to the next, but there was a through line there, but it was pretty vague. Gateways was a bit more of an aggressive crossover, at least with the 24th century segments. We started with an original series story, and it involved the Iconian gateways that were established in the Next Generation episode Contagion, and also seen on DS9's To the Death. And they worked in. There was a bit in an original series episode called That Which Survives, where the Enterprise was sent very, very far, very fast. And we basically retconned that into being an older version of those gateways, which were orbital, and through which a whole ship could go through, as opposed to a person. So we did that, and in that case, the original series part was a prelude. They were developing a Challenger series that spun out of the New Earth miniseries that Diane Carey was working on. That wound up not happening for a variety of reasons. But at the time, it was considered part of it. So that Diane did her own story. So those two were sort of preludes that were all on their own. And then the Next Gen DS9 and New Frontier stories were more closely linked to each other in terms of, because they were all happening at the same time. So we coordinated those stories as best we could with each other. Voyager, not so much, because they were far away. But we all, we talked to each other. Me, Peter, Bob, Peter David did the New Frontier, obviously. I did DS9. Bob Greenberger did Next Generation. Christy Golden did Voyager. And we were in touch with each other, and just making sure, everything was consistent. And there was one scene that me, Peter, and Bob wrote together. So there's a holoconference scene where everybody's getting their mission. That same scene is told from 3 different points of view. It's in the Next Gen book, it's in the DS9 book, and it's in the New Frontier book. And we wrote that together. Bob, Peter, and I sat in the bar at the Farpoint convention at the now defunct, unfortunately, Hunt Valley Inn in Cokesville, Maryland, and we hashed out how the scene was going to go. Bob did a draft of it for his book, and then we adapted those for ours, making sure. And I was the one who went through it at the end and made sure everything was consistent, all the dialogue was the same, and we made it work. And that was fun. That was just, especially for me, because that was, again, Bob and Peter are people who I read as a kid. I was a teenager reading comic books, and I was enjoying Peter David's comics and Bob's comics. And so now they're like friends and colleagues. I was at Peter's wedding, for crying out loud. Ooh. But that was, just getting to do that was just a real thrill. And I've gotten so that's how that worked. It was a bit chaotic at times, but we made it work.
All right, and then we've got.
And I had a in addition to being part of the crossover, I was also writing the 4th book in the post-finale DS9 series, because Paramount gave Simon & Schuster permission to basically continue the story of Deep Space Nine on their own, because there were no plans to revisit it on screen at that point. So we pretty much had carte blanche to do whatever the hell we wanted, at least up to a point. And they wound up doing that with all of the series, because from basically from when Voyager was canceled up until in 2001, up until Picard debuted in 2020, on-screen Trek wasn't doing the 24th century at all. They were doing the 22nd century with Enterprise, and then the 23rd with both the Bad Robot movies and Discovery. So we pretty much had free reign to do whatever the hell we wanted in the 24th century. That changed once Picard debuted, and then Lower Decks debuted, and then Discovery vaulted forward to the 32nd century, and all of a sudden Star Trek was moving forward again on screen. So we were unable to continue with that, but it was a lot of fun, and developing the DS9's storyline past What You Leave Behind was a great experience.
Amazing. Hey, Geek Filter says hello. and then we had C. Jones. They were interesting books. Thank you, sir. Like the Worlds of Deep Space Nine, Book 2. Thank you. Oh, you got a good little following. That's amazing.
The Worlds of Deep Space Nine was a really nifty idea. It was 6 novels in 3 books, 6 short novels in 3 books. So the each book was pretty thick, and each one looked at a particular world that was important to Deep Space Nine. I did Ferenginar.
I bet that was fun.
So, oh yeah, well, I had at that point pretty much gotten a reputation as the Klingon guy, so I wanted to do something that was 180 degrees from the Klingons. So I did the Ferengi, and that was I had a blast with that. It was tremendous fun.
Is there any like Ferengi in and out that you like? Did you write all the rules of acquisition and then use it as a guide preface for what you're doing?
I had a list to work with. I actually made up a couple too. Because I mean, there's plenty of numbers that have not been assigned yet. One of them was one I stole. Like, a lot of the rules of acquisitions are just human cliches reworked, and one of them was "It ain't over till it's over."
Yogi Berra.
Yes.
Yes.
And also another one that I came up with was "He who dives under the table lives to see another day," or something like that. And I tried to make use of the existing ones as well. So.
All right, Keith, thank you so much for spending over an hour with us in the Captain's Quadrant. We really are grateful, Jason, and I appreciate everything that all the time that you've given us, and your master works. You were nominated for some awards as well, and hopefully we're going to be speaking to you, and you'll be the great winner of some great writing awards soon. Where would people be able to buy your works?
All my stuff's available from all the usual online book dealers. Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, Kobo, or at some of them are available at bookstores still. And you can get the ebooks as well from any legitimate dealer. If you want to find me online, just search for my name. I am the only Keith R.A. DeCandido that will turn up in a Google search. I am active on Facebook, on the site. I insist on still calling Twitter. I'm also on Blue Sky. I don't know if that's going to actually turn into a thing, but I'm there.
It's okay to dead name Twitter. It's okay.
Yeah. And I'm on Instagram as well. I have a blog because I'm old, which is decandido.wordpress.com. I write regularly for Tor.com. I do a lot of pop culture commentary for them. I have a YouTube channel in which I've been reading my short fiction, which I started up during the apocalypse of 2020. And I've read most of my short fiction at this point on that channel. And I have a Patreon, which I urge everybody to support, where I do movie reviews, TV reviews, excerpts from my works in progress, vignettes featuring my original characters, first looks at my first draft, and also cat pictures.
Oh, there you go. You won Jason.
Approved.
Well, for $2 a month, you get regular cat pictures plus the occasional dog picture, but mostly pictures of our 2 cats. But there are guest cats and guest dogs that show up periodically when we visit other people. And for that $2 a month, you also get a monthly movie review, which is the $1 tier. There's like, but you should get it. It's patreon.com/crad, KRAD, my initials. I have a bunch of stuff out now, including a bunch of anthologies. The 4 somethings of the apocalypse, which I co-edited with my wife, Ren Sims, and which we also published through our very small press, Whisperwood. It has stories by Shauna McGuire, Jonathan Mayberry, David Mack, Michael Jan Friedman, Robert Greenberger, Peter David, Dayton Warden, Kevin Dillmore, Derek Tyler Attico, David Gerald, the creator of the Tribbles himself, and a bunch of other people, all with alternate takes on the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So we have the 4 PTA moms of the apocalypse, the 4 lunch ladies of the apocalypse, the 4 customer service representatives of the apocalypse, David Mack wrote about the 4 Hollywood executives of the apocalypse, and so on. That's out now. I have stories in Jonathan Mayberry's two anthologies edited by Jonathan Mayberry. One is called Joe Ledger Unbreakable, which he edited with Brian Thomas Schmidt. There's new stories in Jonathan's Joe Ledger techno thriller universe that he let other people basically play in his sandbox. So I wrote a story about Ledger. The main character, Joe Ledger, currently leads a team, covert ops team that deals with weird science stuff. But before that, he was a detective for the Baltimore City Police. So I did a story of him during his time as that. It was basically my excuse to write a homicide episode, more or less. And there's also an anthology that just came out called The Good, the Bad, and the Uncanny: Tales of a Very Weird West. It is full of weird Western stories. And I wrote a team up between two Old West legends, Bass Reeves and Calamity Jane. And there is a fantastical twist on it. There is also an appearance by Sheriff Seth Bullock, and lots of Seminole legends and gunfighting and horses and all that good stuff. So, and drinking. There's a lot of drinking. But you should check that out. It's also got some wonderful, there's some great stuff in that one. Greg Cox, another Trek author, has a story in there called Bigfoot Gorge. Aaron Rosenberg, a bunch of other people have stories in there. Josh Mallerman, Jeff Marriott, has also written for Star Trek and has done a lot of weird Western stuff in his career. So definitely check those out. And I just signed a deal to do a new fantasy series called Supernatural Crimes Unit, which is about a division of the NYPD that deals with crimes involving magic and monsters. It's going to be published by Weird Tales Presents, which is a new imprint from Blackstone Publishing. It'll be out in either late 2024 or early 2025, depending on whether I turn the book in on time or not, because I'm still writing it.
Harness your inner Stan Lee.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not due until the end of January. I'm fine. And I got other stuff coming out as well. So just look me up.
Amazing. We're gonna have
and I'll have more, and I've got more stuff in Star Trek Explorer. I should mention, particularly the Trek stuff. I've had 3 stories so far. One is called "You Can't Buy Fate," which is a Noggin as Redact story, which is going to be reprinted in a collection called "The Mission and Other Stories" by Titan in early 2024. I had a story, the one I mentioned before, the Discovery story with President Rillick, called "Work Worth Doing," is in issue 9. In issue 8, I had a story called "The Kalidian Kidnapping," which is a Voyager story, in which Janeway is kidnapped and Tuvok and Neelix have to rescue her.
Tuvix.
And then I got no, no, separately they have to. And then I've got 2 more coming out. One is called "The Serious Snarl," and one is called "Attempted Break-In." And they'll be out in the summer and the fall.
Amazing. All of those links will be down below, and you can reach him at the Patreon. Be sure to do so. Follow him on all the wonderful socials. Those will be down below in the podcast notes. If you are listening to our podcast, please give us a 5-star rating. That would be greatly appreciated. And be sure to check Keith out wherever you can get your books. And when you go to conventions, be sure to look out for Keith. Be polite and ask for his autograph. Very nice guy. He's a lot of fun to talk to. And we appreciate you stopping by. I am going to also say you can check out that Farscape panel that we were talking about over on our sister channel, To Be Seen. You can check that out. We had a great chat with the cast and writer Rockney from Farscape, who you've written with as well.
Yes. Yeah, we collaborated on the comic book that I was talking about before. He provided the plots for most of it, and then the last 12 issues we plotted together, and I scripted all of it. So
amazing. That's going to do it for us.
He was great to work with too. He really was.
I'm sure he's a super nice guy. Jason, thanks so much. Keith, once again, you're amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. We will talk again soon. And to everybody else, have a great night. And we will see you after the new year, because we are going to take Christmas off. So
what are we going to do on the Agony booth, though? Do we know yet?
Oh, we're going to do a short. You guys can check out our shorts and check out the Agony booth.
Oh, very well.
There we go. It'll be season 5 of the Captain Squadron.
This is like reading a novel and not having an ending, and they expect you to buy another book.